Afternoon, everyone. Hear me okay? Yes, there we go. As my voice is amplified now. Um, I'm Rory, and I'm here to try and answer this question. When can you rely on AI? So, CTO at Axial 3D, I'm actually delighted with the programming today. Evan gave you a lot of context around the kind of the whats of the machine learning in terms of what segmentation is and so on. What I'm going to talk about is what we've learned from taking something that is still kind of frontier in terms of the capabilities and how that's actually deployed and used for real in a production setting. Just for fun, that is from a manual for one of the old GE computers for programming them. And there's stuff in here that's still kind of similar to what we have today. So analyzing the problem, feeding in the facts, leaving the computer to run for ages, you have a sandwich, it comes up with an answer. It's sort of the same thing, and it's kind of picking up on what Evan talked about earlier on in terms of that idea of understanding your data and analysing it that Florence Nightingale did a very, very long time ago. So, Axial 3D, this is what our mission is. We want to make patient-specific surgery routine. That's what we exist for. That's what we want to make happen. We want to take what we know is transformative technology and bring that to people who can apply that where care is happening. So our focus really is very, very specifically on these two things. I'm sure you can kind of see what those are, bones and blood vessels. So crudely speaking, difference between blood and bones, carpentry and plumbing is pretty much what that distills down to. Evan, a really good example that I'm going to explore a little bit more in terms of those patient-specific devices. But I'm going to give you a case study that we were involved in very, very recently that was in the news. So these are two conjoined twins. It's Meenal and Mira. This was actually in Sky News a couple of weeks ago. This model that you can see here floating in space, we made that. And we made that using our technology where we segmented the blood vessels. We also segmented their kind of skull. And what's happening here is Dr. Ali, who's the surgeon who led on this, him and his team were able to use that model to understand the relationship between the blood vessels, between the two twins. Because they were conjoined at the head, some of those vessels were shared. And trying to understand how do we separate those in 2D. So you saw one of the snapshots in Evan's talk of the face. It's so incredibly difficult to try and map from 2D into 3D using your brain. We can actually do that. So this is a really unreal example of our technology in action. And this was in July. It was like a 14-hour operation. Would have been much longer if they weren't able to use their AR technology combined with our models, which are generated through AI. So we help out surgeons at point of care. We've got lots of examples of where surgeons have been able to either use digital models or printed functional models to practice surgeries ahead of time, and it makes a big difference to the outcomes for those patients. There's another type of patient-specific surgery, and that's a little bit more common and a bit more off the shelf. So that big NHS waiting list that Evan referred to earlier on, that's going to be a combination of mostly elective or long-running cases that need to be dealt with. Significant number of those are in things like joint replacements, heart surgeries, and so on as well. So these are elective procedures. You're kind of planning ahead to do those. So give you a quick history of one example of joint replacements, so knees. So these have existed since the 1950s. So this happens because over time, we're all getting older, we're all living longer, and unfortunately, you're not Wolverine. Your body's going to kind of fall apart over time, and you can lose cartilage your knee. Osteophytes can kind of start to grow there, and it starts to impinge your mobility. A way of solving that is let's whack it out and replace it with a bit of Wolverine, some titanium. So in the 50s, you had the innovation there was small, medium, or large. You have a look round the room here. I don't think we could classify ourselves as small, medium, or large. We're all different sizes, shapes, heights. Our bones are different. We have different mechanical alignments. So this was better than not being able to walk, but not that much better. In the 1990s, what was introduced was what I call the kind of Clark's shoes evolution of knee replacements. So instead of small, medium, large, we have a 3F, we have a 5C, we have an 11B. So more sizes. You can see here actually the shape of this implant. It's remarkably similar to this one. And if you go and have a look at all of the knee implants that are out there in the market today, they all look the same. There's a little bit of patent infringement dodging that happens to have a slightly different shape on here, but they're all essentially the same thing. So better, but not as good as it's become in the last, and this is only in the last five or 6 years, where we can get to what are called patient-specific instruments. So that's the ability to take my CT scan, to do the segmentation that Evan explained for you earlier on, turn that into a 3D model, and then use that model to manufacture custom cutting guides like Evan showed, but even better, custom implants that fit you and exactly match your mechanical alignment. The same applies to your shoulder, to hips. There's spinal interventions now that are all becoming patient-specific as well. So give you an idea of the volume of total knee replacements. 700,000 of these happen every year in the US. 15% of them are patient-specific. So there are benefits to this. Evan described the kind of better outcomes that you can achieve, less time in surgery, reduction in blood loss. You can do this using things like robotics and so on as well, but there is a challenge here, is it's only 15%, not because this doesn't work, but because we can't create enough of them because of some of the challenges described. So Evan talked a little bit about how AI can impact the speed at which things go. The other big problem that we have here is not an AI problem. This is a digital transformation problem. This is we don't quite know how to join systems up. So typically what you'll see today in the world of medical devices is these are manual processes. And quite often when we're talking about AI as technology, we narrowly focus on here's the AI doing stuff, and we ignore where it sits in amongst everything else. So an AI can do nothing without data. So how do we get data in there? In the world of healthcare and medical devices, because it's mostly geared up for facilitating in-hospital procedures and radiologists and PAC systems, they're disconnected. You still see DVDs getting posted to companies to get the medical images in there. It's pretty wild. Doing the segmentation task is manual, coloring in, some acceleration that you can get around that as well. And it's sort of a repeated picture the whole way across the workflow to create a patient-specific device. So again, thank you, Evan. You showed the landmarking, which is necessary to understand the alignment of somebody's anatomy that you're trying to recreate. And then when you get into things like planning and design, a way I kind of like help people understand the equivalence here is Microsoft Word versus Google Docs, right? The amount of functionality you have in Microsoft Word that you never touch is extraordinary. It's about 80% of the features in there no normal person would ever use. In Google Docs, you just type and you use headers and, level 1, 2, 3. That's the kind of thing that we have going on in terms of planning and design here as well, is that you have super complex CAD software trying to do simple things, and the way that you get around that is by writing really long work instructions and training people to do lots and lots of really complicated things. So today, for a knee case to go from I have a DICOM to I have a plan takes about 115 minutes of, and this is important, active time. So this is the time that somebody is spending actively working on this, but there's loads of dead time in that as well, right? So when somebody looks at the image, they download it, they sit waiting for 20 minutes while it downloads, they capture some information, they fill in a document, they upload that back into a system again, they're waiting for that to finish. While they're doing that, they can't do much else. So as well as the kind of active time it takes, there's a lot of dead time in these processes as well, and that's why we can't get from 15% to 20% to 50% and so on. But this is where the medical device industry is going and where surgeries are going. It's the same sort of thing we see in precision medicine on the other side of a care pathway, which is more about interventions that are designed and medications that are designed for you. This is the carpentry and plumbing equivalent of that. So we've solved this basically. Like this is the thing that Axial have focused on doing. Evan gave you a little bit more in segmentation. So here's an example of a knee segmentation. So each of the bones, the tibia, femur, and patella, separated out automatically. Somebody can see what that looks like in the screen. This is where a human uses a tool that is simplified to allow them to complete the job of doing knee segmentation quickly and in a way that's integrated, allows them to do the landmarking in a way that's quickly achievable and integrated, and then visually showing them what the plan looks like. And it's joining all those things together so that patient-specific surgery process can happen quite quickly. And I'm not showing you AI here, really. What I'm showing you now is some user-centered tools that are built on top of the use of AI. So again, I'm going to say this a couple of times, AI doesn't sit on its own, spewing out information into the world. It has to be connected and part of systems, and some of them completely unrelated to the AI process itself. So, sounds good. Patient-specific surgery, the evidence is, the clinical evidence is there that this has a significant difference. I spoke at a conference in Montreal to some musculoskeletal surgeons week before last, and there was a lot of conversation about how can we get these models used more in part of our surgical planning. So clinical evidence is there, technology is there. What are the risks, really, of using AI? So I guess we've heard quite a few people talking about risks today in a slightly abstract way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try and put it into context for you. So when you're thinking about how you can make AI your next, you're sort of aware of some of the things that you need to think about and some of the challenges that you might come across. So where does the AI go in this picture? So bit of architecture. Will said this in the thing this morning. I used to be a software architect, so I have to have one of these on the screen. So segmentation and landmarking sort of sits right at the bottom of this as the kind of engine that takes in data and it needs to go back out again. But there's layers above this in terms of how we use it. So data needs to get in here through image acquisition. Segmentation and landmarking happen. That needs to be fed into what we would describe as our anatomy engine. So that's the segmentation, analysis, automatic generation of plans, and so on. We have specific 3D capabilities because natively AI doesn't speak 3D, so we have to convert that data into 3D models, and then that has to be presented back to humans right up at the top of it as well. So it's just a part of an overall system in terms of how you need to use this. Beneath this, super important bit, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, is that we have well over 2 million images now that we have used to train these models on, and I'll talk about how we create that ground truth as well. It's super important that you get that right. If you have an AI model, and I'm sticking with deep learning and plain old machine learning here, is you put crap into a model, it's going to generate crap when it comes back out again. If you ask generative AI something, yeah, it's a roll of the dice whether it's going to come out with something real or not. The other bits I'm going to point out here, I suppose, as well, is over on the other side, outside of my lovely architecture, there's things like hardware, cloud capabilities. There's a bunch of logos there that are all very official looking because they are. So data security, privacy, compliance, things like HIPAA, ISO 27001. I work in the medical industry. I have to do this. If you work in the market industry, you do not have to do this. You do have to protect your information, but you're not being told to think about risk. You have to think about risk. That's the thing that I want you to take away from this. So there's software standards, there's manufacturing standards that we have to follow, and that turns up with all sorts of obligations. Some of them are fun and exciting, some of them are not as fun and exciting in terms of trying to meet them. The really, really useful bit that you get from working in a regulated environment is that you are forced to think about the risk of, well, pretty much everything. But there's very specific ways that you need to think about risk when you're using an AI system. So there's a thing called hazard analysis that is used to kind of try and understand what are the things that could go wrong when we're building a system. If there are any engineers in here, you're going to be familiar with this. If there's anyone working in cybersecurity universe in here, maybe. Yes. So you gentlemen know all about like kind of risk analysis and trying to understand what could happen and what could go wrong and how do we mitigate that. But for people who work outside of these kind of environments, it's a little bit unfamiliar. So let me talk through a really made-up example of hazard analysis. So this is our hazard. Godzilla will attack us and destroy the city, right? So this is a situation that could cause harm to people, to the environment, or to the world around us. So potential hazard here. So we identify our hazard, and then the next thing that we need to do when we're using anything like this is to think about the likelihood that this is going to happen, right? So we do a risk assessment. So these foolish people have decided that it is unlikely that Godzilla is going to attack us because we haven't seen him in decades. Godzilla's not around, there's no way this is going to happen, so it's very, very low risk. They make a super bad decision to continue aggressive logging in a nature reserve. If any of you are Godzilla fans, you will know that Godzilla is the protector of the environment. he's going to find out about it, and he's going to attack the city, right? So that's a silly kind of example of what risk analysis is about. It's about identifying a hazard, thinking about the likelihood that that's going to happen, and then what is your action that you're going to take off the back of it. So focus on outcomes. I picked the Godzilla example because I have genuinely sat in meetings with a bunch of technology people, and they come up with scenarios like, we're going to get hit by an asteroid, we should think about that as a risk. You're like, no, please, come on. Focus on real outcomes. Be really, really realistic about impact and likelihood of it happening. And then when you're looking at it, you need to think about what are the risk mitigation costs, right? Because there's all these benefits that you can get from using AI as part of a system, but there are also going to be costs, right? So if you're paying a little bit of attention to things like large language models and all that kind of stuff, you're starting to see jobs turning up now around prompt engineering. And what we're doing is we're creating large language models to manage other large language models. And what we're doing is building risk upon risk. The other thing that has been hinted at that isn't really kind of part of the discussion at the minute as well is that your use of things like ChatGPT are heavily subsidized by hyperscalers. You are not paying what it costs. Someday your business is going to pay what it costs. So can you survive those kind of shocks to your system? So you've got to think about some of those kind of things. So this is a real one from our application. So you kind of need to think about our context. What we're making are models that are directly used as part of surgery, right? So the use of an inaccurate 3D model results in loss of blood during a procedure due to a mismatched instrument. So if you're thinking about the kind of the workflow that we're involved in, we can cause this hazard that could start way, 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 way upstream, but only happens when somebody is in the middle of having a surgery. So what's the likelihood of this? That's a kind of a hard question to kind of to answer, but actually when you're talking about AI, you're talking about probabilities and statistics and the accuracy of the model. So Evan's example earlier on of the 87% accuracy for detecting the retinal diabetes, that's what I like, a 1 in 10 chance it's going to be wrong. That's kind of high, but because the hazard is not loss of blood, we can probably go, that's okay, that's acceptable. That is not acceptable for us. So our accuracy needs to be higher. Our segmentation models are 99.6%, but that's still, when you scale that, turns into a big number where it could go wrong. So humans need to be involved in this. We need to review the output of it and make sure that our end-to-end manufacturing process is reducing that risk the whole way through. And as you look at these AI systems in your own domains, that's the way you kind of need to think about this, is that any of these technologies, if you think of it from a business point of view, are only valuable when you start using them at scale. But when you start talking about scale, you're increasing the impact of your risks. So that's the way you need to think about it. Something else to think about a little bit here then as well is that if you are an AI company or you're using AI, you're a software company, congratulations. Welcome to development, basically. A little bit different for using generative AI. Like ChatGPT, that's just a abstraction onto something you type into it, that's fine. You're not going to integrate that into your business. They have APIs, but APIs mean integrating into other systems. So that's why I showed you this earlier on. AI is part of a larger system or a wider stack. The other thing about AI is that it does not exist on its own. It doesn't manifest into being. You need lots of people for this to happen. So in Axial 3D, we have MedVis engineers who are experts in anatomy. They actually understand the data that we're dealing with. We have machine learning leads and engineers. We have software engineers, QARA, that's regulatory for those of you folks who don't deal with this on a regular basis. You have the likes of me as a CTO. We have product leads, device designers who are expert in the surgical part of it, people who understand cloud, people who understand 3D, and we have clinicians who are involved in our team as well. So this doesn't happen on its own. It needs all of these people. So everyone has a role to play in this, and this kind of starts leaning towards the idea of how do you design your organization around being able to make use of this stuff. And to, again, what I'm hoping I can share with you a little bit is how we've successfully managed to do this. These are things that you can think about and take forward for you to be able to successfully integrate AI into your universe. So when you join all of these people and technologies together, you can build something like this. So this is a very, very simple tool. You couldn't see it properly earlier on. You can see it a little bit better now, but we have built this internally in-house. This model is the direct output from our segmentation algorithm. You won't be able to see it on here, but there will be tiny details around the edges of the bone that may need to be adjusted, because I sort of shared one of the hazards that I was explaining earlier on. If you have an over-segmentation, a guide won't fit properly on that bone when you're doing surgery. It'll slip around the place. If something slips around the place during surgery, there are saws. That will go wrong. You've introduced a hazard. So we focused on how we use AI safely as part of this, but the thing that's really, really better and different is we've gotten rid of all of those manual tools. We can join it together, and we're sort of using all of the promise of digital transformation that you can join things together and have better workflows and so on. So using our stuff, you go from 115 minutes down to 20. That's a fairly significant impact in terms of being able to create a patient-specific instrument. That moves us 6 times in terms of the number of patients that we can help out. That results in 6 times more of these things. It results in that downstream effect on things like waiting lists, better experience for patients. We're all living longer. We can run around for a little bit longer on our new bionic knees. So that's the resulting impact of doing this, but there's a lot that you need to think about when it comes to risk. Appreciate that was a lot, so we're going to look at Norway for a couple of seconds. Let that kind of roll around in your brains a little bit. We'll just take a little bit of a pause, because that's a lot. Like that, I've distilled down 3 years of hard learning into, like, I don't know, hopefully I'm sort of vaguely on time here. So breathe in and back out again. Let's talk about what this sort of means for you, to kind of give you a little bit of context around your business and your future and how you might be able to apply this. That is the height of children's entertainment in 1980. So that's me hitting a television that doesn't work with a wooden spoon. That's what we used to do for fun, kids. Back then, though, there was no personal computers. Smartphones didn't exist. There were no clouds. There were no clouds during the summer, because they were always better when we were younger. But there was also no actual, kind of cloud hosting and all the rest of it. AI existed, 100% did. It's theory. There's a lot of the techniques that we use now. All of those theories existed back then. We just didn't have the means to actually try them out for real. We do now. And in our universe, CT scans were in use for only like 8 years. Like it's kind of strange when I kind of think about those things. Some of the imaging technologies that we have were brand new. CT scans haven't changed a huge amount in the, I'm not going to do the maths because I'll feel old, but they haven't changed massively. But the capability of interpreting that information and finding new ways of dealing with it definitely has. So there were some talks in here earlier on. I think you see one of the guys down the back there, Jordan, I think, was talking about how you can use AI to improve signals in weak data. CT scans and MRIs, companies like GE are using AI to improve the fidelity of images now, and that's just one tiny example of where things can change around quite a bit. So that was 1980. In 2018, I had the kind of privilege of talking to a bunch of businesses in Northern Ireland, and I was talking about what should you do about AI. And my advice then, and it is the same now, have a strategy about how you are going to deal with AI. That doesn't mean you have to start running rampant towards using it, but back in 2018, this wasn't quite certain that this was a really, really good idea. I am glad I've been proven right, because there's more people here today to learn about it, and we're seeing more and more applications inside businesses. So that's 2018. What do we do in 2024, 6 years later? I'm going to go sort of back to what I was talking about earlier on, is that AI doesn't sit on its own. This is a digital product challenge, right? So apologies to anyone in digital consultancy in here, but 24% of your efforts make it past the finish line. Even smaller number of those actually deliver the value that they've been predicted to deliver. Why am I telling you this horrible, horrible statistic? AI products are digital products, okay? Like, that's just kind of what you're talking about here. You are taking something, it needs to integrate into your business, it needs to be thought of as a product. And that means developing skills to help you deploy things and think about it in the way of a product rather than a magical technology. So that's what I'm going to move on to next. Best thing you can do, and for those of you who are familiar with all this kind of stuff, apologies for going over the same old ground. This is new for some of you. Best thing you can do is be here today, learn about this, understand the landscape. So AI is not magic. And one of the things that I'm slightly worried about, and I think Lolly talked about it this morning as well, we have, as humans, a little bit of a habit of anthropomorphizing things and projecting characteristics onto AI that it does not have. Generative AI doesn't think I don't like when people say it thinks. It does not think. It doesn't reason. It has incomprehensible statistical models that guess what it's going to do next, right? So it is not magic. So AI is this idea that it's a technique that allows computers to mimic human intelligence. And then the subsets of that, machine learning, there's so much goodness to be gotten out of plain old machine learning. That's like basically predictive models. If I see a patient who presented with condition A, B, and C, that means they have D. That's nice and simple. That's the sort of thing that you can do on right now without spending an awful lot of effort and time trying to figure out how does generative AI do that. It won't and it doesn't. Start there. We use deep learning. That's good for tasks like image recognition, kind of speech to text and stuff as well. There are emerging ideas that generative models can do this, but note of caution, GPT 3.5 was good at programming. In 4, it got worse. And this is something that happens when you expose these models to more and more data. You gain in one place and you lose in another, so you need to be able to understand that. And then there's plenty of talk about generative AI. Here's an example of how it's not magic. Nick Cave names the one album Nick Cave that changed his career. I don't know what that means. That's generative AI trying to create clickbait to get me to click on a story. So it's kind of gone a bit haywire there. And then I'm really interested in caves because Stump Cross Cavern to open another cave to the public. I don't know if that's another Nick Cave or a regular cave. But that's an example of how this stuff is not magic. It is not a silver bullet. It's not completely rock solid and reliable. So from an education point of view, there's some training resources out there that I would point you at. All of the hyperscalers have their own particular flavor of it. Don't just listen to one of them. Have a look at what they're saying in different places. All of these companies have services that allow you to adopt machine learning today. They all have foundational models, all that kind of good stuff. So if there's any of those that you're kind of interested in, you can use the little QR codes to kind of load some of those up. So another useful thing that I've found when I've been looking at this myself, and actually I was quite happy when I found this, it sort of reflects our own experience as Axial 3D, and actually my experience before this, kind of having done this a few times in different places, is they've suggested a really nice framework that helps you think about how can you adopt AI to make that your next kind of transformational thing that you can have in a business. But it's broken down into these different areas: technical capabilities, governing practices and structures, and organizational and cultural characteristics. Remember this? Hopefully, you were only here a couple of minutes ago, so you haven't forgotten yet. I'm going to take this and I'm going to flop it down onto those different capabilities just to kind of help you understand what that actually looks like and fits. So from technical capabilities point of view, what that translates into really is people and team that understand what AI is, how to leverage it, how to deploy it, and how to use it. Somewhere that you can run it. We run on AWS. Choose your hyperscaler, they're all the same. We use NVIDIA for training. I mean, that's just because NVIDIA have done a really good job of selling shovels as part of the gold rush. That is what they do. And some of the things I'm saying here as well actually suggest you apply critical thinking. Why are these people telling you to do this stuff? Is it because they think it's going to help your business or it helps theirs? So question some of the things you're getting pushed and sold. Capabilities 62304 is the medical device software development standard. You don't need that, but if you're going to do software engineering, think about building some standards and capability in your organization. Talk to your friends in cybersecurity to make sure you're doing things right. Talk to your friends in engineering and cloud platforms to make sure things are going right. Governing practices and structures. I have these inflicted on me because I work in the medical universe, but that is no bad thing. So HIPAA tells me what sort of data I should protect, what I should do to try and protect it, and make sure I'm doing it right. 27001 ISO standard does the same thing. I've heard it mentioned once or twice. Clay talked about how much he cost. This stuff costs money. It's not free, and it's not magic. You need to understand when you scale these things, how much is that going to impact your business? How much does that impact the cost of your product? Really easy to bolt a chatbot onto the side of an application, but the more users that use it, the higher the costs become for your product. So that needs to fit into your kind of thinking about how do I deploy this and run this. The idea of like kind of managing and efficiently using resources is super important. If you look after, like honestly, you look after your costs, you're going to be looking after the amount of compute that you use and the amount of time that you're spending on it. Those things are directly linked. So being environmentally sound is actually sensible from a business point of view. And then I have the FDA. I'm not going to talk about them. Last bit is the sort of organizational and cultural characteristics. Anyone in here like in work in product or design or that kind of universe? No. Spend some time looking at that world and learn about this idea of design thinking. It really, really helps you focus on your outcomes and kind of focusing on how do I achieve certain outcomes. Machine learning also, and this is something for all you technologists that you need to learn and need to explain to your business stakeholders. ML is not the same as writing functions where it adds 1 + 1 and you get 2, and I can tell you it's going to take me 3 weeks to do that and to deploy it to production. Machine learning is a series of experiments where you come up with a hypothesis, you try to get it to generate some predictions, and you will get some level of confidence around what it's doing. So that Evan's example, 87% confident that this is the pathology I detected. I'm 99% sure this is a bone. And business people get very disappointed when you can't tell them, oh, it's 100% working. It never will. It never will. And that's something that you need to appreciate as an engineer. You need to start explaining that. And as a business person, you need to understand that this is how it works. And that's why you go all the way back to understanding how we fit in risk. Last thing there, it sort of looks like toast on a pool table. It's supposed to be a whiteboard. You always need to be learning about this thing. Stuff is continuing at pace. So, ChatGPT released new models every 16 minutes now. Why are they doing that? Because they need to raise more money than has ever been raised in the history of time. That is not because the capabilities are rampantly accelerating. It's because they need to be in the news. So you need to be able to distinguish between what's real, what's hype, and what you can actually use. And the way you do that is to continue to be interested and learn and educate yourself around how these things kind of work. So when can I rely on AI? Now, this is the thing, right? In 2018, I'm not sure I would have been as aggressively, use this thing, this is great. I can tell you now that, yes, you can. You can leverage all sorts of different types of machine learning as part of your businesses today, or as part of your organizations, or even in your day-to-day life. You can play around with this stuff at home now. I think an old colleague of mine, Omid, was sort of saying that in 2018, trying to run locally a language model was really, really complicated. I can press a button and try these things out now. So barrier to entry is really, really low. So we've proven in Axial 3, and many other organizations have, that you can adopt this can run at scale, and this has value. You can do it too. I know a lot of what I've been talking about here is about risk, but don't let that hold you back. So a couple of quick tips just to finish off. When you're talking about AI in your organization, don't fall into this trap and make statements about what you're going to do with AI. We can replace all our developers with GitHub Copilot. Yeah, you probably can, but what happens when it's generating code that doesn't work and you don't have any experience to fix it? That's a bit of a problem. So maybe we shouldn't make that statement. I can create marketing campaigns for a medical device company using ChatGPT. I had to tell someone, you cannot do that because I don't want to go to jail. I can't have it making up stuff that I present to the market, and the FDA go, what is that claim? And I can't prove it. So don't make statements. We can make an internal combustion engine out of cheese. You could, but don't think it's a good idea, right? So don't make statements. Ask questions. So this is going back to the idea of design thinking. It's how might we reduce assembly line failures? How might we increase the quality of our market research? And I sort of go a little bit back to the talk that was on this morning where Will and the team had created Clay. Part of what they talked about was, what can we do with this, or how might we do this, and how might we achieve it? They didn't run straight to let's build this thing and fire it out there. That's a really nice example of what you should be doing here, is challenging yourself with the questions that make a difference to your business. So how might we reduce waiting times in A&E? I can tell you, if you go into any trust in Northern Ireland and say, I'm going to use AI to reduce your waiting times, they're going to go, get out. We have harder things to solve. So you need to think about how we might do it, and that brings you into thinking about the context in which you're doing it. And that's the question we asked ourselves, is how might we scale patient-specific surgery? And this is where we've managed to get to by thinking and operating that way with the people that we have. So am I going to make any predictions about where the future goes? No. But it's going to lead forward. Things are going to go better. And actually, it's really, really starting to be clear that it's going to be quite awesome. So hopefully that's helpful. Happy to talk, take questions, share our experience in this in Axial 3D. And once again, thank you for your time.